Good evening, everybody. Hell's Unicorn here once again, and I've decided to opine on all of the recent attention that has been directed back towards ex-President George W. Bush in the advent of the release of his famed memoirs, Decision Points. I have not gotten around to reading the book yet, though I promised myself I would at some point, just so I could remind myself why I thought he was a very lousy president and why I'm thankful that he is gone, even though I think we have gotten a replacement that is hard to believe actually worse than him in several respects and just as bad in other respects. Suffice to say, I'm not a big fan of interventionist foreign policy. I am a 9/11 skeptic. I don't believe the official story. I'm not necessarily someone who swallows each and every conspiracy theory floating around about the events, but suffice to say, the 9/11 Commission report, which was essentially a hack job done by a bunch of political hacks from both political parties, is insufficient and untruthful. It's basically a whitewash. I don't believe it. Doesn't necessarily mean that I think the government did it, but I do think that there are so many holes in it that people are free to speculate, and I don't judge anybody for speculating on it. I am not a big fan of interventionist domestic policy either, while we're on the topic. I do not believe in pouring billions of dollars into the farming industry of the Midwest to prop up corporate farmers at the expense of everybody else who's in the farming profession. I belong to a family of farmers. We have 23 acres here in Pennsylvania, and we saw no money from that big monster of a farm bill that Bush put out before 9/11, and the only benefit that we really received from Bush Boy was actually our marginal income tax rate went down about 6 or 7 percentage points. But beyond that, at least from my perspective, the guy did not really accomplish a heck of a lot. He had less of I would say, a morally compromised persona than his predecessor, Bill Clinton, although Clinton proved to be a little bit better at handling economics, even despite the fact that he largely did so by concurring with the congressional Republicans who were hell-bent on balancing the budget. It was essentially a cooperative effort, and I'm willing to give credit to both Clinton and Newt Gingrich for balancing the budget. And one of the reasons why I voted Republican in this election is because I'd like to see a return to that. I don't think that Obama himself is going to be the kind of person like Clinton was, who was willing to put the interests of the country ahead of his own interests, but I do think that the person that's elected after him probably will, and with the current congressional makeup, we can start to get the damn budget balanced and hopefully cut down on all of the needless, useless spending and the really poor attempts at trying to return to the glory days of FDR. And if you think those were glory days, I recommend talking to somebody who lived through the Depression. They were anything but. So anyway, I'm rambling a bit here. Back to the original topic at hand. I have no doubt whatsoever that Bush's memoirs, or ergo Decision Points, is going to be nothing more than an attempt for him to reclaim whatever kind of a legacy he thinks he ought to have. And the truth is that as time goes by, he will be remembered probably in the same light that FDR is remembered, and history will probably look kind on him. History always looks kind on wartime presidents, particularly wartime presidents who can boast of allegedly protecting the country after one of the worst attacks ever. This is where FDR's claim to fame comes from. Had he not presided over World War II, I venture to guess that he probably would not be seen in the light that he is seen in, and I definitely don't think things like the internment of the Japanese would have been excused except for those reasons. And in this day and age, there's a little bit more information available. There's not as many news stations that are able to shill for politicians without there being other sources out there debunking this shilling. And so I think that history may not look as kind upon George W. Bush as it does at FDR, but I do think that when all is said and done, people like war. I think George Carlin is right. We love war. excluding myself and most of the people who subscribe to my channel, we like the idea of a nice televised conflict with guns blazing, bombs blowing up, infrastructure crumbling, and hell on earth reigning basically everywhere except for in our own living rooms. And as such, much like FDR, much like Lincoln, and all of these other notorious violators of civil liberties and these woefully terrible charlatans of economics, leave us not forget Lincoln gave us the greenback, which was almost as big of a debacle as the Federal Reserve Act, which Woodrow Wilson subjected us all to. Essentially, they nonetheless get remembered as being great presidents, and it all has to do with the war issue. People are going to be a little bit skeptical of Bush being some kind of humanitarian given all the talk about waterboarding, but let's put this in perspective. Roosevelt had people executed by military tribunal. Now, of course, with the decades of propaganda villainizing the Germans, people can excuse this by saying, oh, they were Nazis and all Nazis deserve to die and all of that stuff. That doesn't really require any thought to do that. But anyway, I've basically been just flying by the seat of my pants here, and I think I've hit upon a number of different tangents. But suffice to say, I am contemplating doing a formal review of Bush's book, and I am probably not going to go easy on him. I may post it on some place like Amazon.com, I'm not sure, or I might just post it here for all of you to read. But suffice to say, even though I consider myself a conservative in many respects and a libertarian in all other respects, I have very little respect for W. Boy, and I have little respect for his father, for his grandfather, who made the family fortune selling weapons to the Nazis, nor do I for any other current or previous members of the Bush clan. As far as I'm concerned, the only figure of any note in the entire family was Bush's great-grandfather, who I believe was a Presbyterian minister. Apparently he wasn't a good enough one to keep his son from going astray, it seems, unfortunately, and thus we were subjected to the vicious cycle of tyrannical Anglican Church-born dynasty members, much like the Kennedys from the Roman Church, essentially ruling us like kings, and we of course we allowed ourselves to be ruled essentially with our knowing and silent consent. And as I'm sure many of you are probably going to be saying, well, we don't have to deal with the Bushes anymore. At the end of the day, the Bushes are just one head on a multi-headed hydra. And if you waste your time cutting off the heads, all you're going to do is have that head grow back along with another one. Aim for the heart, and the heart of what is wrong with America is not found in its figureheads, but with its entire infrastructure, the way that our country is built, the way it's designed. Bush, in essence, I think was not really the tyrannical charlatan everybody made him out to be. He is a part, albeit probably a less intellectual part, of a very real and a very, let's just say, bad system that this country has been subjected to for the better part of 100 years. And the sooner that we put what he was and what other presidents have been and will be into this proper perspective, we're not going to get anywhere, and we're going to continue to be subjected to people like Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama, and we will wonder why. So anyway, a bit random, but necessarily to the point. Prudence to myself and benevolence to all of you. Good evening.